door. I thought Jake was going as well then. I thought you were off through into the children's work. I found it interesting when Jane shared that scripture earlier on, and she was talking about finding that place of rest in God, and that fighting and that sort of turmoil that goes on inside, and handing it over to God and allowing God to sort of work that peace within our lives. And then Chris came up and kind of said the same kind of thing, and all the way through the worship I'd got the same kind of thing going on. There was I got a real knot in my stomach, and it was strange. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't uncomfortable, I wasn't ill, but all of a sudden this knot just sort of came into my stomach. And I remember someone saying once that sometimes one of the ways that God can tell you something is by, if it's something that's going on in someone else, he can kind of put the same thing on you, and then when you recognise it, it kind of goes away. And as I thought about that, the knot in my stomach kind of went away, and I felt like God was saying that, thank you, Grace, she's wonderful, thank you. I felt like God was saying that there's someone in this room that all the way through the worship, you were sat there and you had this knot that was deep in your stomach, a bit like an uncomfortableness of an uncertainty or an unsureness of what you were supposed to be doing. And again, it kind of tied in with this wrestling and this fighting and not knowing what you were supposed to be doing. And the same kind of message popped into my head. It was that we need to, in that moment, you need to hand that over to God and say, God, you have your way, I'll trust you and I'll follow you, whatever you're calling me to do. But I'm putting it into your hands. I'm going to take the pressure off me and I'm going to give it over to you. And it was that sense of fighting and wrestling with something that you felt you had to find the answer. You had to be the resource, the be-all and end-all, as it were. And God just wanted to say, hand it over, give it over, get out of the way, and let me do the work that I'm calling you to do. Just follow the path that I'm calling you to. And this month we've been talking, we started at the start of the month with the series which was entitled We Lead with Vision. It's one of our core values, one of our culture codes within Victory is that we lead with vision. Everything that we do is based on vision. And I don't know about you, I don't know if you've ever, those of you who drive, I wear contact lenses. I used to wear glasses for a little while and I got fed up with being kicked in the face with a football and breaking my glasses, so I went to contact lenses. But one of the things that I found is occasionally I would go out in the morning and forget to put my contact lenses in. And around the house, I'm short-sighted, but not terribly short-sighted. So around the house, I don't really notice. Everything's fairly close until I get in the car. And then as I start to drive down the road, I realise, hang on a minute, that car is very, very blurry that's coming towards me, and I can't quite see what's going on. And I think I've done it maybe 3 times where I've got in the car and not put my contact lenses in and not been able to see it all, really. And I don't notice it until I start going somewhere. And then all of a sudden I realise, hang on a minute, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. I can't see what's going to happen. And that blurred sort of white line keeps doing this sort of snaking thing in the middle of the road. I have no real vision of where I'm moving, but I don't notice it until I start to move forward. When I'm stuck in the home, when I'm sort of stationary and not doing much, I don't really notice that I haven't got the vision that I need to move forward. But as soon as I start putting momentum behind what I'm doing, I realise that actually my vision isn't right, my vision isn't in the right place. And it's the same with our life, that if we decide to sit still and say, you know what, I'm just going to sit here and do nothing, we don't really realise how blind we are until we start to move forward. And if we're not following the plan and the purpose that God has for us, if we're not buying into the things that God has for us, we all of a sudden realise that our vision isn't clear, the things that we're doing aren't clear, and we're moving forward almost blind. And that kind of brings me on to a story that I want to share from the Bible this morning. If you've got your Bibles, please feel free to turn to 2 Kings and chapter 6. And I love this story in 2 Kings chapter 6. It's one that I've read loads and loads of times. But I think it really sort of ties in with this theme of leading with vision, that we can't lead forward if we don't see where we're going. So 2 Kings chapter 6. And we're going to read from verse 8. But this is a story about Elisha. Most of you will probably have heard of Elisha, who's a prophet in the Old Testament. The Old Testament's part of the Bible, if you haven't figured that bit out. It's the thing in your hands. If it's not in your hands, then it'll be on the screen, hopefully. If it's not on the screen, listen up, I'll read as clearly as I can. So are you all sitting comfortably, as they used to say on a TV show that I'm too young to remember? So verse 8, it says this. It says, "Now the king of Syria was making war against Israel. And he consulted with his servant, saying, my camp will be in such and such a place." Well-known place, that's such and such a place. "And the man of God sent the king of Israel, saying, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are coming down there. Then the king of Israel sent someone to the place of which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned them, and he was watchful there, not just once or twice. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was greatly troubled by this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So he said, go and see where he is, that I may send and get him. And it was told him, saying, surely he is in Dothan. Therefore he sent horses and chariots and a great army there, and they came by night and surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, there was an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? So he said, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So when the Syrians came down from him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, strike this people blind. Strike this people, I pray, with blindness. And he struck them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. Now Elisha said to them, this is not the way, nor is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. But he led them to Samaria. So it was when he had come to Samaria that Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw. And there they were inside Samaria. Now when the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, my father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them? But he answered, you shall not kill them. Would you kill those whom you have taken captive with your sword and your bow? Set food and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master. Then he prepared a great feast for them, and after they ate and drank, he sent them away, and they went to their master. So the band of Syrian raiders came no more into the land of Israel. So I find this a real fascinating story that we have this army of the Syrians, and the king of Syria decides that he wants to attack the Israelites and go down, and he says, as it says in that first verse there in verse 8, he says, we will go and make camp in such and such a place. Obviously the writer didn't know where such and such the place was, but he says, we'll go to such and such a place, this is where we're going to make camp. And every time they went down there, Elisha got a word from God that says, the Syrians are coming here, go and tell the Israelite army so that they know not to walk past that place or not to camp in that place, so that the Syrians can't attack you. So every time the Syrians turn up to attack the person and make camp ready to attack, the Israelites aren't even there. And every time the Syrian king does this, every time Elisha gets a word and says to the Israelite army, go somewhere else, don't go where the Syrians are. And he gets to the point where the Syrian king thinks there must be a traitor in our midst. There must be someone who is telling the king of Israel what my plans are. And all his men turn around and say, no, it's not us. It's the man of God, Elisha. It's a great title to have, isn't it? The man of God, Elisha, who hears even the things that are spoken in your bedroom. That would make you wonder, what on earth has he heard? I don't know about you, but if I was sat there and all of a sudden I got told that there's a man of God who hears absolutely everything that I say, my head would start thinking through everything that I'd said just in case. Because you just never know, do you? And this guy's hearing everything that you've even said in your bedroom. But yet the king of Syria says, well, find out where he is and go and bring him to me so that I can talk to him. I don't think he really wanted to talk to him. I think he would probably just kill him. But he says, go and find him, so bring him to me. And what the king of Syria doesn't realise is that the man of God is hearing everything that he says, even the things that are in his bedroom. So when he says, go and find the man, I'm pretty sure the man of God would have heard that as well. But they turn up, they surround the city where Elisha is living, and they go at night and they're encamped around the city ready to take him in the morning. And as the servant of Elisha wakes up, he goes out, he draws the curtains back, he looks out the window and he goes, oh no. He was probably a little bit more emphatic than that, but he goes, oh no, there's an army surrounding our city. So he goes to Elisha, he says, look, there's men around here, they've all come to take you away. And this is my translation of what Elisha turns around and says. He goes to the window, he has a quick look out, he goes, oh, that's all right, stick the toaster on, and carries on about his daily business. And the servant says, hang on a minute, can you not see the army of people that are around us? And Elisha turns to his servant and says, God, open his eyes that he might see the army that's for us. And all of a sudden he sees the chariots and the horses that surround the city that are even more than the number of the Syrians that come down. So already we see that Elisha has a sight that other people don't have. He sees something beyond the ordinary. There's a spiritual realm. It talks about it in Ephesians chapter 6 that we don't war against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against the darkness, the things of the spiritual realm. And Elisha had an insight into this realm. He could see beyond the natural into the spiritual and see the things that were on his side. And so often when we step into situations, we walk in with a natural sight rather than a spiritual sight. We look at those situations that we face and we say, God, I don't know how I can overcome the situation that I'm facing. And God says, do you not see the things that are with you? Do you not see the army of God that is surrounding you in every situation? And so many of us walk through situations and all we see is the problems that we face, not the person that's walking with us. If we saw the God who walked with us and the army that he had, we would turn around, stick the toaster back on and enjoy our breakfast. I might be making a little bit of a joke of it, but that is ultimately what we should, any situation we face, we should be able to turn around and say, the God who is with me is greater than the situation that is against me, and therefore I can carry on with the call that he's placed on my life. I can continue to walk in that path that he has called me to. There's one of the Psalms, Psalm 23, it's a really well-known psalm, and I see this as a little bit of a split personality psalm. I'm going to read it to you and maybe you'll see why I think that. But in Psalm 23 it says this, as I say most of you will probably know, but it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's all cheery and wonderful. He makes me lie down in green pastures, he leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Listen for this change. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Hang on a minute, David. Everything was nice a minute ago. Everything was really nice. God was leading me in these wonderful paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And then David all of a sudden switches and goes, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever and ever. David has this sort of backwards and forwards, and I always found it really weird that he goes from this really cheery, wonderful place where he's led in green pastures and still waters and everything seems wonderful, to all of a sudden walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And one of the things that I find interesting is actually when you read it through, it doesn't actually change. But what happens is in verse 3 he says, you restore my soul, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. So God is directing the path that I am called to for the glory of his name. And even when I'm led through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil that comes against me, because I know I'm walking in the path of righteousness that God has called me to. The interesting thing is so many people go through life and say, God, direct me in the path that you've called me to, that I may walk in righteousness for your name's sake. But a problem comes and they go, God, why have you forsaken me? What actually we do is we read that verse, and really what we read is, God, lead me in paths of niceness for your name's sake. But as soon as it becomes hard work, you better take over or I'm out kind of thing, is the way that most people sort of read that scripture, is God, lead me in the nice way, that it might be wonderful and everything might be pleasant and these green pastures and still waters might be around me wherever I go. But actually what happens is that psalm starts and says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters, beside green pastures, he restores my soul. But then he calls me to walk the path and the purpose that he's placed for me in righteousness. What righteousness means is to be in right standing with God. In other words, to be on the right path that God has called me to. Regardless of the situation I go through, you have to know that it's the path that God has called you to, that you're walking in right standing with God, following him in the place that he has called you to go. And you continue to walk on that, and regardless of the situation that you go through, it doesn't matter, because you know that God is with you. He never leaves you. His rod and his staff comfort you. In every situation you face, God walks alongside you, with you, there at the side of you. And Elisha saw this in this chapter 6 of 2 Kings, Elisha saw beyond the natural and said, God, even in the worst situation that you bring me through, I know that you're with me and you will bring me through it and I will overcome whatever situation I face. And we see that because what happens is as the Syrian army start to move towards Elisha, Elisha prays to God and says, God, blind this army that they may no longer see. And what happens is as they approach, all of a sudden they're all blinded. And Elisha goes out and Elisha tells a little bit of a fib. It's a holy fib, but he tells a little bit of a fib because he turns around and says, this isn't the place you were looking for. Neither is this the person, but I'll take you where you're supposed to go. So all of a sudden Elisha turns around and he says, follow me. It's a really interesting thing that Elisha turns to a group of blind people and says, follow me. I would love to have seen the next 15 minutes of coordinating an army of blind people to follow one man. That must have been really, I don't know whether he went with like the primary school, everybody link hands and we'll walk down the road together or something, or if he roped them all together. I don't know how he did it. I wish the Bible included little details like that. That's the things that I find really interesting, and I'm sure those are the questions that we'll get to ask God when we get to heaven. But Elisha says, follow me. He turns to this group of blind people and says, follow me and I'll take you where you're supposed to be going. And then he takes them to Samaria, where the Israelite king is. And as he gets to Samaria, he says, God, now open their eyes that they may see exactly where they are. And they realize, as soon as they open their eyes, that they're in the presence of the king, of the enemy that they've been facing. And all of a sudden, I think the thought must have run through their head, oh dear, this is it, we're done. And the king of Israel had the same thought of, great, we've got them, let's knock them all off and we're done. We don't have an army to go against us anymore. So the king of Israel turns around, and I love the fact that he asks him twice. He asks Elisha twice. He says, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them? He sounded almost excited. I read it that way. I don't know whether that was how it's written. I read it that way. The king of Israel is so excited at the idea that we could win this war and I haven't had to do anything. And so he says, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them? And Elisha turns around and says, no. Would you do that to a prisoner of war? Would you do that to someone that you'd captured in the heat of war and brought back? No, you would provide for them. You would take care of them. And so Elisha says, prepare a table for them, feast, give them a feast of food, and then send them back to their master. I love one of the things that it says in Psalm 23, that he says, he prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies. But then we're called to prepare a table for the enemies when they're in the presence of us. It's a really interesting thought. God prepares a table for us in whatever situation that we're going through. In other words, God provides for us in whatever situation we're going through. But when we see the provision of God, we're then called to be that light to the people around us, whether we like them or not. It's very, very easy to prepare a table for the people that you like. It's really nice to have friends around for dinner. It's not so nice to have enemies around for dinner. It's not so nice to say, I don't like you, but I'm going to show the love of God to you anyway. And that's exactly what Elisha did. Elisha had every opportunity to do them in. He had every opportunity to say, you know what, wipe them off the face of the earth and we will never have to worry about the Syrians ever again. But God calls us to love our enemies. Jesus said that. He said, love your enemies, do good for those who despise you and hurt you. Because what happens is, as the Syrians saw, all of a sudden they walked into this city, their eyes were opened again, and they knew this was the moment where they were stuck. They had nowhere else to go, and this could very well be the end. And yet the Israelites and Elisha had a choice to show them the love of God. In the world we face enemies, we face people who stand against us, who come against us and say, you know what, you are an idiot for being a Christian, you are foolish for being a Christian, I will try and destroy everything that you're doing. And yet at some point they will come to a place where they have no more room to go, they have nowhere else to go. And then we have a choice in that moment whether we show the love of God or whether we break them back down. You see, I love the fact that Jesus would surrender himself for the people who despised him, for the people who forsook him, for the people who beat him and put him on a cross. It was the same people that Jesus died for, and it's the same people that Jesus calls us to love. The people who stand against us, the people who look at the calling that's on our life, the people who say, you will never achieve the things that you think you're going to achieve. You will never do the things that God's calling you to do. And yet God calls us to turn around and provide for them. to show them the love and the provision of God and to send them back. But one of the things I find interesting, I can guarantee you, again, it's not written in there, and I wish someone from Israel had just hopped down to Syria a couple of weeks later to have a look and sort of a follow-up meeting with the Syrian army. You know, they need like follow-up meetings in the Bible and things like that, because he should have gone along to this Syrian army and said, can I just do a little bit of a follow-up interview? Has your life changed since you found your way into Samaria and we provided for you? And I guarantee every single one of those people in that army would have said, my life has changed completely because I thought I was dead, I thought there was no hope, and yet I found mercy and grace and I was able to go back into the life that I was called to. Every single one of us, if we found Christ, have hit that situation where we thought, I'm at rock bottom, I have nowhere else to go, this is the very end, and then God showed up. God showed up with his mercy and his grace because of the price that Jesus paid for us, gave us a new life, a new calling, and somewhere to walk. He prepared a table for me in my worst place, but then we're called to prepare a table for those who persecute us, to prepare a table to show God's love, to show God's grace for those who come against us. Maybe your enemy isn't people. Maybe your enemy is the circumstances that you face, the situations that go on around you. Maybe your enemy is your health. But God calls us to walk in righteousness through that situation, beyond that situation. Whatever situation we face, God is calling us to walk with him through that, knowing that he will be the provision for us, he will lead us through that, and his grace will shine to a world around us. I love this story of Elisha because it just shows a man who had vision beyond what we see. So often we look in the natural, we see the circumstances. We're more like the servant than we are like Elisha. We look at a situation and we just see the problems. And yet, for those of you who were in the Ephesians study group that we did a few weeks ago, we saw in the very first week that Christ is the head of the church. And we did this little diagram. I probably should have put it up on the screens for you, but maybe we'll just sort of, I'll email it to everyone or something like that. But basically we did this diagram with a little stick man. I loved my stick mans through this series, but there was a little stick man, and there was a divide across the screen with heaven at the bottom, no, heaven at the top, and earth at the bottom. And the head of the stick man was in heaven, and then the body was in the earth part. And the body, it says in Ephesians, is the church is the body of Christ, and Christ is the head of the church. And the head has the vision. The eyes are in the head, unless you're built differently. I'm pretty sure most of us, our eyes are in our head. If yours are on your fingertips or something, have a look at that and get a doctor to see it or something. But most of us, our eyes are in our head. Our vision comes from the head, and the vision should come from Christ. We should see in the heavenly realm, even though the body works out on earth. The church is the outworking of Christ's vision in the heavenlies on the earth. So when we pray the Lord's Prayer and we say, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Basically what we're praying is, God, allow us to see the things that you see in heaven and be the outworking of that on the earth as your body, the church. Each one of us is called to see beyond the natural, to see into the spiritual realm, to see with Christ's eyes, to see with heavenly eyes, and say, God, I want to see what you see worked out on the earth. I want to see what your heavenly eyes see on the earth and put it into practice. But that comes from knowing who we are in Christ, knowing that Christ is the head of the church, knowing that Christ gives us our identity. Elisha knew who he was in order to be able to look out the window, say there's more with us than there is with them, and then go back and carry on with his day and not worry about it. It would be great to be able to just, whatever situation we face as Christians, to be able to stand there and say, it doesn't matter because I know that God will come through for me, because there's more power that God has than what the enemy has. There's more power that God has than the situation that I face. But as we walk on that path, we have to decide whether we're going to walk on the path of niceness or whether we're going to walk on the path of righteousness. It's impossible to have proper vision of the heavenlies if all we want is the path of niceness. Jesus puts it another way in Matthew chapter 7. He says that broad is the gate and wide is the way that leads to destruction, but narrow is the gate and rough is the path that leads to righteousness, and few are they that find it. There's a select few people that will find true righteousness, true walking in the path that God has called us to. But the reward is so much greater. The reward is that we see beyond the circumstance, and we see the heavenly realm, the spirit realm, and we see what's going on in the heavenlies, and we know that we can overcome the situations that we face because of who God is in us, because of who Christ is in us. But we have to make that choice to walk the path that God's calling us to. As I said at the start, I wear contact lenses, and it's a bit like making that choice to put your contact lenses in. When you're stood around doing nothing, it's very easy to just get on with your day. But when you decide to make a choice to walk on the path that God's called you to move into action for what he's called, it says he leads us in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. So basically what we're called to do is to live a life that glorifies God, that glorifies his name, and brings his name to the people around us that don't already know him. That we glorify him, we lift him up, and our life should be an example of God, an example of Christ to the people around us. But if we make a choice to walk in that path, we've got to choose to stick the contact lenses in. We've got to choose to be able to see as God sees. We've got to say, God, I know that you see this situation differently to how I see it. So give me your eyes, give me your sight into this situation, that I might be able to see how you see, and that I would know that I can overcome whatever situation I face. Every single one of us, as I say, has been in that situation where we get to the point, like the Syrian army, where all of a sudden our eyes are open to the circumstances that we're in, the situation that we find ourselves in, and we think that there's no hope. And it was at that moment that Christ showed up and said, I have a way for you. I will be your provision. You might have thought this was the end. You might have thought that you were dead. You might have thought that there was no way out. But I can offer you a new way. I can offer you a new life, and your life will be changed because of that. But then we're called to be that example to the people around us as well. That we find a new life, we find a new calling, and then we're called to show that life, to show that love, to show that grace to the people around us. John 1:14, it says that Jesus came full of grace and truth. We're called to be the grace and the truth to the people around us. We're called to be that light that came into the world, to shine and be an example to the people around us. But we have to make a choice to lead everything we do with a vision that Christ sees. Because if we choose to try and create our own vision, if we choose to try and look at everything ourselves, we'll always fall short. I've got to be honest, vision is one of those words that always sort of makes me feel icky and horrible. There's certain verses in the Bible that people quite often have that come up and you just cringe every time you hear it, because you think, oh, it's just, and one of them was James 1:2 was kind of always one that people, it says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, and everyone goes, oh, it's all well and good reading that when everything's great, but when there's trials, it's really hard to read that and say count it all joy. And I've got to be honest, vision was kind of the same thing for me. I always felt a little bit visionless. Growing up, I had very little idea what I wanted to do. I went through college thinking I wanted to do something. Within about 6 months of finishing college, I just didn't want to do it anymore. I either wanted to go into banking or accountancy. So I went through college, I did business studies, I did maths, I did ICT, I did all these things that would line me up perfectly for going into that or going on to university. And so within about 6 months of finishing college, I thought, I don't want to be a banker or an accountant. It's a dull job. It's sat in an office all day, and I'll just be fed up. And I had no idea what I wanted to do when I left college. And so I spent 6 months working for my nan and granddad doing gardening work or working at home. And my mum was doing a pantomime at the time, so I ended up delivering leaflets in the cold, that was awful. Did 15,000 leaflets around Rugeley, and that was my job. And then my granddad said, well, why don't you come and work for me putting up television errors? And I did that for sort of 18 months, and I enjoyed it for a little while, but it wasn't my passion, it wasn't where I was supposed to be. And then after I finished working with my granddad, I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I went back to working for my dad, something I'd been doing since I was 10 years old, in school holidays and things like that. And I thought, well, I'll go back and I'll work for him until I find a job that I want to do. 6 years later, I was still working for my dad because I couldn't find anything that I wanted to do. But the problem was I was constantly looking and saying, okay, what is my vision for my life? What am I supposed to be doing in my life? What am I called to do? What are my passions? What are the things that I feel I should do? And I can honestly say, I don't think once in that time from leaving college to 2.5 months ago, or maybe a little bit further back from that, but in that time where I was looking for work outside of church, I can honestly say I don't think at any point I turned around and said, God, what's your vision for my life? How do you see my life working out? And the problem is, so many of us do exactly the same thing, that we go through life saying, what's my vision for my life? What's my calling for my life? And it's like walking around without contact lenses in. It's blurry, it's foggy, it's really hard to see what's supposed to be going on. But if we change and we say, God, what's your vision for my life? What's your purpose for my life? What are you calling me to do? And how can I walk in the path of righteousness that you've called me to glorify your name, to do everything for your name's sake? That actually it's like sticking our contact lenses in. But we still have a choice whether we move or not. I can stick my contact lenses in and still walk around the house all day and get nowhere. It's really easy. I can see things a little bit clearer, but it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. We can turn around and say, God, what are you calling me to do for my life? And then turn back and do exactly the same thing that we've been doing and just carry on about our day-to-day business. But if we say, God, if you're calling me, regardless of the circumstance that I face, regardless of the situation that you're calling me to walk through, even when I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, I know that I don't have to fear anything that comes against me because you are with me. The army that is with me is greater than the army that is surrounding me. The circumstances that you see are greater than the circumstances that I'm facing. It's that choice to say, God, I want your vision and I want to walk in that vision. So my question this morning is this. Are you walking in all the ways of niceness? Or do you want to walk in all the ways of righteousness? Do you want to walk the path that God is calling for you, regardless of the situation you face, knowing that whatever situation you face, he will lead you through it? Or do you want to walk the path that's nice, the path that's comfortable, the path that says, when a situation comes up, I'm going to find a way to move around it rather than move through it? And then my challenge for you this morning is this. Will you prepare a table for your enemies, like God prepared a table for you in the presence of your enemies? Will you be the light of Christ to the people that you don't like just as much as to the people that you do? Will you show God's provision in every situation rather than just taking the provision that God's given us? Because God has provided that table for us. It says that in the Psalms, that God has prepared a table for us in the presence of my enemies, that no matter what situation I face, God's provision is there for me. But Elisha took it a step further. Elisha knew that it wasn't just about receiving what God had given him, but it was about then giving it on to the people around, showing the things that God has given to us to the people around us, whether we like them or not, whether they're our friends or our enemies. Invite your enemy for dinner. It'll wind them up like anything. It's great, because they have no idea why you're doing it. They have no idea why you're being so nice. I'm sure that Syrian army would have sat there as the food was coming out and they'd have been skeptical. They would have sat there and said, you know what, avoid the potatoes, they're probably poisoned, and avoid the wine, it will kill you. And they probably sat there for a little while, and it probably took one of the Israelites to go, no, it's fine, and sort of ate a little bit, and then they feasted. It says that they didn't just stick out bread and a little bit of water for them, but they prepared a feast for them. God's provision for your life is like a feast. But are you willing to share? Are you willing to pass that on to someone else? We have that choice to make. Prepare the table for your enemies. John's got something he's going to share, and then I'll hand back over to Jay.
I was sitting there thinking, what is the way forward really for the church, for individuals, and for myself? And I've come to the conclusion that we need to be men and women of the Spirit. Because without the Spirit, we will just be doing everything in the flesh. Okay? Now, if Christ could tell his disciples to wait in Jerusalem till they were clothed with power from on high, I think we need to go individually before God and ask of him the strength to do and to fulfill what he desires each of us. And the passage which has been burning in my spirit while I was sitting there is found in Joel chapter 2, and it says this: "After this I will pour out my spirit on all humanity. Then your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will have dreams, and your young men will see visions. I will pour out my spirit on the male and female slaves in those days." In other words, God is going to pour out of his spirit, but if you're not willing to be led of the spirit, forget it. We've got to be led of the spirit. And what Micah shared this morning is for us to wake up to the fact that each of us have been given talents in God. It could be 10, it could be 5, it could be 1. And it's the person with the one talent who didn't use it to the fullest that God intended that person to use. In fact, he saw his master as a fearful person. So he went and buried the talent. And when his master came back and was looking for the fruit to be born, he said, "I knew you were a very hard man. And so here's your talent. I buried it in the ground." Now I believe God is saying to each one of us, we've been given something special in God, and it's up to us to use it. And if you don't use it, pass it on to the banks or whatever, so that God can do something with it, so that interest will be given back to God. But I am convinced this morning that we need to be men and women led of the Spirit, not of the flesh. And God wants to pour out upon you his Spirit. He's promised it in Joel, that if we ask, we will receive. And each of us, when was the last time you prophesied? When was the last time you did something for God? When was the last time you had a dream? When did I have a dream? And the other one was visions. What's your vision this morning? Is it to be on fire for God, or to just go on as if nothing is wrong? You know? I put that as a challenge to you this morning, as I put it to myself. We need to pick up what God has granted to us and use it to the fullest. So if you've never been filled with the Spirit of God, if you've never waited for the Spirit of God to fill you before you go out and do, you need to do that this morning. And I think, Mike, you need to pray for people here who so desire God but don't know how to go forward. We need to pray and ask God to bring a release amongst us, so that we'll be a people who will possess. Because that's what he said to the children of Israel: go in and possess. But they didn't. They rebelled. And they lost so much. And I believe this morning God wants us to be men and women of the Spirit.